Hello and welcome to today's lesson. Can you guess what we are going to learn today? We are going to learn all about the verb to do. Now this is a widely used verb and it is commonly used to talk about what you are doing or what someone else is doing. Now let's look at some examples. I do the work. You do the work. They do the work. But we say he does the work. Why is this? This is because the verb form changes depending on the subject. Let's see how in detail. Now, let's look at how to use the verb to do in the positive sense. I do, you do, he does, she does, it does, we do, and they do. Now we use I do when you're talking about yourself. So if I'm talking about me, I would say I do the work. So remember to use I do when you are talking about yourself. Next is you do. If you're talking to someone, you can say you do. So I'm talking to you. I would say you do the work. Now when do we use he? If you're talking about a boy or a man, you would use he. So the same way you would say he does the work. Now if you're talking about a girl or a woman, you would say she does the work. Now you must notice that do changes to does for he, she, and it. So for these three words, it is does and not do. Now when do you use it? You use it when you're talking about something that's not living or an object. For example, you can say it does matter. If something is really important, you can say it does matter. Now let's move on to the plural subject pronouns. So we use we and they to talk about plural, to talk about more than one person. So if I'm talking about myself and someone else, or myself and a few other people, I would say we. For example, Sam and I do the laundry. So I can say we do the laundry. The same way, we use they when we are talking about a group of other people. So if I'm talking about my friends or a group of other people, we can say they. They do the work. So to sum it up, we use I do when you're talking about oneself. We use you do when you're talking to someone. He for a boy or a man. She for a girl or a woman. It for a non-living thing or an object. And the plural forms are we do for you and someone else, and they for a group of other people. So now we've learned the basics of how to use to do in the positive form. Now let's look at how to make the verb to do into a negative form. But before we begin, we need to know two important things. Do becomes don't, which is a contraction of do not. So a contraction is a shorter way of saying it. So instead of saying do not, we can just say don't. Similarly, does becomes doesn't when you change it to the negative form, which is again a contraction of does not. Now, let's get started. So I do will become I don't. For example, you can say, I don't drink coffee. You can also say, I do not drink coffee, but since don't is shorter and easier for writing and speaking, we say don't. So you can say, I don't like coffee. Similarly, if you're talking to somebody, you can say, you don't like coffee. Now let's move on to he, she, and it. Here we use does and not do. So we learned that does becomes doesn't, which is a short form for does not. So he does will become he doesn't. So you can say he doesn't like coffee or he doesn't drink coffee. Similarly, if you're talking about a girl or a woman, you can say she doesn't like coffee. Or if you're talking about an object or a non-living thing, or even an animal like a cat or a dog, you can say it doesn't, which is short for does not. Now let's move on to the plural subjects, we and they. So we learned that we and they is used when you talk about more than one person. So we do will become we don't, because do becomes don't when you change it to negative. Similarly, they do, which is used for groups of other people, will also become don't. So they don't. They don't like coffee. Now let's revise the negative forms of the verb to do. It's I don't, you don't, he doesn't, she doesn't, it doesn't, we don't, and they don't. Now, to make it into a question form is very simple. We just have to take the sentence in the positive form and invert the subject and the verb. Does it sound confusing? Don't worry, let me show you an example. So here we have taken a sentence in its positive form. We do speak English. So the next step is to look at the subject and the verb. So this is the subject. We. And what is the verb here? It is do. So what we have to do now is invert the subject and the verb to make it a question. So we do will become do we. So in the positive form, the sentence would be, we do speak English. When you make it into a question, it becomes, do we speak English? With a question mark. So it's as simple as that. You take the sentence in the positive form and invert the subject and the verb and add a question mark in the end. And you have the question. So just like I showed you in the previous example, you can take the positive sentence to make it into a question. Let's see how. I do becomes do I when you change it into a question sense. So let's look at an example. I do like dogs. Change it to a question, it becomes, do I like dogs? I love dogs. What about you? Now if I want to ask you if you like dogs, I can say, do you like dogs? So here we can see that you do becomes do you. So it's as simple as that. Just invert the subject and the verb and add a question mark at the end of your sentence, and it becomes a question sentence. Let's look at he, she, and it now. So for these three, we use the form does and not do. So when you invert it, he does becomes does he. Does he like dogs? So if you're talking about a boy or a man and you want to know if he likes dogs, you can say, does he like dogs? The same way, if it's about a girl or a woman, you can say, does she like dogs? Always remember to add a question mark at the end of your question. Same way for it, it becomes does. So the question would be, does it? Now if you recall, in the beginning of the video, I gave you an example for a positive sentence using it does. I said, it does matter. So we use this statement when something is really important. We would say it does matter, meaning it is significant or it is important. Now if you want to ask if something is important, you can say, does it matter? So this is the same as asking, is it really important? So you can say, does it matter? Now let's look at the plural forms. We do and they do. So we do becomes do we. We're simply inverting the subject and the verb. And they do becomes do they. Do we like dogs? Or do they like dogs? So it's really simple. Now we've learned how to use the verb to do in the positive sense, negative sense, and how to ask a question with it. Now you know what's next. It's time for a small activity based on what we learnt in this video. So here I have a couple of sentences for you and I want you to fill it with the right form of the verb to do. Now here P stands for positive form, Q stands for question form, and N stands for negative form of the verb to do. Don't worry, I'll help you through this. Let's begin. The first sentence is, I blank like ice cream. And here we're required to make it in the positive form. So what would be the right form of the verb to do for the subject I? It would be I do. So I do like ice cream. Let's move to the next sentence. Blank you play cricket. Now here you notice there is a question mark. So you know that the sentence is a question. Let's look at the subject. The subject is you. So what would be the right form of the verb to do for you? It would be you do. So to make it a question, you have to invert the subject and the verb of the positive sentence. So you do will become do you. So it would be, do you play cricket? Let's look at the next sentence. We blank watch TV. And here we're required to make it in the negative sense. So what would be the form of the verb to do? The positive form would be we do. So when you change it to negative, we learnt that do becomes don't and does becomes doesn't. Since here we're using do, it would be don't. So we don't watch TV. Blank they have a dog. Again, there is a question mark. So we have to make the sentence a question. The subject here is they. So what is the form of to do for they? It is they do. Again, we invert the subject and the verb to make it a question. So they do becomes do they. So it would be, do they have a dog? It blank matter. Now we need to make it in the negative form. I use this exact sentence as an example in this video. So what would be the answer? It blank matter. So the form of to do for it in the positive sense would be does. We say it does and not it do. So we learned that to make a sentence negative, do becomes don't and does becomes doesn't. So it does will become it doesn't in the negative form. So it doesn't matter. We've come to the last sentence. She blank gardening. Now this one's easy. All you have to do is put it in the positive form. So what would be the positive form of to do for she? Let's say it out. It's I do, you do, he does, she does. So for he, she and it becomes does. So the answer would be she does gardening. So now we've come to the end of this exercise and we are thorough with how to use to do in the positive, negative and question sense. Now that was a fun lesson. It's goodbye for now, but don't worry, I'll see you soon in the next video. Bye!